how can you talk about, because, you talked about it, it's the only, I guess it's the only I'm assuming the only recorded interview with him on record anywhere, correct?
It's the only one that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Now,
all right, so
his son, Henry had a son. His name was Richard, who at the time of my contact with Henry and his wife, he was with the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra, and I believe he was the principal clarinetist. So I never talked with Richard, but I had some emails with him years ago, and I don't know where he is now. But Richard would also have recollections about his father's mission.
Okay. Well, and spinning this forward now, and you've done all this work on Panzram and everything else, but what are you up to these days? I think people would be curious to know. I know you're retired, or at least you're retired from the prison system, but what are you up to these days?
Well, I did retire in 2008 from the Bureau of Prisons, but since I started out with this curiosity, I still have this fascination for it. So I keep my hand in it on my terms. I'll do some litigation consulting and some corporate consulting. I still keep up with the literature, keep in contact with some retiree friends. I was back in San Diego in April, and I stopped by the institution where I used to work, got in a conversation with some of the officers there, and it was like turning the clock back 20-some-odd years. And, I just picked up where I left off and listened to their stories, and I told a few, and I could connect with people in that profession.
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't want to leave any stone unturned today, so I'll ask you, is there anything you want to talk about that I haven't brought up yet? Because, sometimes, even I, the interviewer, don't think of all the important things to ask. So if there's something you want to talk about that maybe I haven't touched on, go for it.
Well, I want to talk about where the original documents are now. This story has a big connection with San Diego State. And so in 1980, Henry donated the original Panzram manuscript to the Special Collections Department of the Love Library at San Diego State University. So that's a priceless document that is well cared for in acid-free boxes. It's under lock and key, and my understanding it's been digitized. So anybody around the world who wants to see it can access it through the World Wide Web. The materials I donated, they officially received them in December of 2014, and so some of that stuff is digitized, and there's some additional stuff that will be digitized. But from my view, as far as what I've accomplished in life, getting that stuff to San Diego State, knowing how important it is, how significant it is, and how it honors Henry Lester, it means a lot to me knowing it is where it is. And I want to give you an illustration about one of those documents. There's a logbook in there that Henry used when he was a young officer. So this is in the late 1920s. And so this was a training book, very similar to the logbooks that I used as an officer in the Bureau of Prisons. And this is a quote from that logbook. Tell joke about governor who went through prison. Everybody innocent except one man who admitted his guilt. Governor said, better get you out of here before you contaminate all these innocent men. So that was done in the late 1920s, and the same kind of stuff. You hear the same stories when you go into prisons today about how inmates will say that they're innocent.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. Joel, you came on here and you gave me more than I could have possibly asked for. You were awesome. You were a wealth of knowledge that I couldn't have expected otherwise. But Joel, is there anything for that you want to throw out as far as any kind of projects you're working on, contact info if people want to contact you, that type of thing?
If people want to get a hold of me, I'm on Facebook, and I'd be happy to answer any questions they've got. John's movie is a standalone story that captures the essence of this. And so I would refer people to John's film and also to Tim Metcalf's film to see it's somewhat fictionalized, but he did a great job with that film as well. So the story is timeless, and anybody who is aspiring to work in a jail or a prison, I think they're must-read and must-watch materials as far as learning from somebody who was so ahead of his time, Henry Lesser, back in the 1920s, and who carried this manuscript around for 40 years until it was published. It says a lot about the significance of the story, and the best thing that could happen from this is some young officer reads this and decides when he goes to work and he gets confronted with a situation, he does things in a proper manner rather than abusing somebody. Because when you work in a prison or a jail and you abuse somebody, you'll likely get away with it that time, but that person is going to remember it, and what he's going to do is, if he's been abused, the next uniform that he gets an opportunity to have his way with, he's going to assault one of those officers. So it's a process that is it has to be broken.
Joel, on that subject and many, many others, you were just vastly educational here. I really appreciate it. You were awesome again. If there's, again, any other time, if you want to come on and talk about any subject, you just, let me know, and I'll definitely bring you on because I loved it. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
It's my pleasure. You asked very good questions, and I thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you for your time. It meant a lot to me. You take care, okay?
You too.
And everyone, that was Joel Goodman. I want to tip my hat to him for coming on and absolutely killing it. Sorry for the, a little bit of pun there, but, I didn't mean to put it that way. But, we've got somebody else holding right now who, was a collaborator on the film, and that is Mr. Robert Ray. Robert, are you there, sir?
I am.
Well, it's good to have you on. Joel just came in for almost an hour and killed it. Maybe I won't ask as much from you because I know maybe it's not the subject that you're as familiar with, but I do want to talk about your background and kind of how you got into the film, that John Borowski did about Panzram.
Well, I got into it because Panzram's autobiography is held here, and it's kind of ironic. It was John that actually told me the significance of what we had here. There are about 350 manuscript collections here, and so I don't know that much about all of them, to say the least. And when John Borowski called and said, you have the autobiography of Carl Panzram, notorious serial killer, and I'd like to see if we could come and film portions of the manuscript itself and where it's being held and so forth. So it's interesting. It was John who certainly learned about it through Joel, and when he first visited, I think we took a whole day to go through what filmmakers do, and as archivists, we're real concerned about the preservation of materials, and here we have these hot lights, and so I was hesitant, but John educated me on how careful he would be, and it's really from that point that a lot of the publicity about the Panzram manuscript is here, and the whole collection, and now what may turn out to be even more important than Carl Panzram's autobiography are the papers of Henry Lesser that Joel Goodman has donated to the archive. Joel spoke eloquently about the value of that material, and he mentioned the notebook that's in the collection that Henry donated to him, and a host of other things that Henry gave to Joel to save, and they are now here. We're in the process of making those papers available. The Panzram manuscript is very important, and Joel and John have done eloquent work on its significance, but we have to remember none of us would be here today speaking at all if it hadn't been for Henry Lesser. And the world would not know about Carl Panzram except for some obscure clippings from newspapers if it hadn't been for Henry Lesser. Henry Lesser is a noble soul, a person of great character. And Joel said he, for 40 years, held on to that manuscript with faith and a feeling that someday it would come to the light of day. And John has helped to bring that to pass. But we can never forget Henry. We can never forget Henry Lesser. And I shouldn't drone on about that, but I can't overestimate the importance of his character, and we hope to get Henry's papers, that notebook, and the correspondence, and all sorts of other things about Henry Lesser available, like we have made the Panzram manuscript available.
Let me ask you this, because you touched on it, how you guys had talked to John, and he had to explain to you that he'd take great care with the manuscript and wouldn't mess it up. So I assume prior to this, you'd never had a filmmaker wanting to look at any of the manuscripts that you house there, correct?
Not since I've been here, no. That was the first time a filmmaker has come into our collection and wanted to use it. Archivists our job is to preserve and to make available, and so we have to be very careful and protective of things. But by working with John, I learned with him that why do we have this stuff if we aren't able to reach out with it and have work done on it like John has done. And I think John's story will be the beginning of further interpretations of the Panzram manuscript, and Henry Lesser being so far ahead of his time. It was a good thing that we did this, and I think it was more important than when when Tom Gaddis and James Long published Killer, a journal of murder in 1970. Gaddis, I hope I'm not repeating what others have said, but Gaddis did Birdman of Alcatraz. Mm-hmm. And so he would have learned about, and I think he met Henry Lesser obviously, before